May 8th, 2026. We are in the 5th year, and this is day 74 since the start of the full-scale invasion. A warm welcome to the situation report, and actually to the last situation report of the week. I won't be back until Thursday. In the meantime, there will be a few special videos. In today's report, we see attacks on, of course, refineries. Interesting information. One day before the parade on the 9th. May and a short report. Why a short report? Well, today's situation report will be a bit shorter than usual. I'm currently under massive stress and still have to prepare some videos for the next few days. Basically from Sunday to Wednesday, for you to watch from Sunday to Wednesday. Otherwise, of course, I'll go bankrupt. So I somehow have to integrate this into my private life to generate additional video content within just a few days here. But of course, today's report is still filled with very interesting information. At the front, there's nothing to report at all. Pretty much nothing has changed. I also think that until Thursday, hardly anything will change there. You're not missing anything. But what we can see is something that we have accomplished. And by we, I mean the wonderful community here behind War and Tactic. Because the next evacuation vehicles from the last big fundraising campaign have already arrived in Ukraine. Ukraine Hilfa Berlin reports this in their latest post on X. At the same time, something is also being reported in Rostov, namely a missile attack. Specifically, a logistics center was established, which had to cease operations. According to the Ukrainians, mainly electrical equipment for the front was stored and shipped here. That is one of the important targets. Rostov is the hub for the southern front. Let's take a look at it on the map. So down here is Rostov-on-Don. And Rostov-on-Don is basically connected to Volgograd, another important logistics hub on the Russian side. And everything that basically comes from the east, north, or south of Russia usually goes here to Rostov. And from Rostov, it then goes via the new overland corridor, specifically along the rail link here towards the southern front, as well as up here going in towards Donetsk. And with that, a large part of the entire front, or the Russian-occupied territories, is covered. That's why Rostov is arguably the most important hub of all. That's why it was so critical back then, when the Wagner Group started their march of justice against Moscow. And Rostov was one of the first targets they captured. Why? Well, it's obvious. If logistics collapses, the army does too. And with that, Prigozhin was able to put even more pressure on. Shortly after that, he backed down. By the way, backing down is a good cue. We'll hear more about that today as well. The Russian oil refinery in Yaroslavl is once again in flames after a drone attack. What's especially notable is that the facility was already targeted in an attack less than 2 weeks ago. This exact pattern is becoming increasingly clear. It's no longer just about individual symbolic hits. Ukraine, or the attacking side, is deliberately returning to the same energy facilities, apparently with the goal of preventing repairs, permanently disrupting operations, and continuously increasing the strain on Russia's infrastructure. Yaroslavl is not an insignificant location. Refineries are central hubs for fuel supply, military logistics, and industrial stability. If these facilities are hit again within a short period of time, it shows one thing above all. Russia is failing to reliably protect critical infrastructure even after well-known dangerous attacks. That's exactly where the psychological effect lies. Every new strike conveys that the Russian air defense can react, but no longer forms a complete protective shield. If a facility is hit, it will likely be hit again soon. That's almost guaranteed. Rather than control, it appears there is a constant sense of being overwhelmed, which is especially risky for the Kremlin when Moscow wants to show strength. For the first time, the Kremlin has revoked accreditations already granted to foreign journalists for the parade on May 9th. This affects, among others, reporters from ARD, ZDF, Spiegel, Sky, and so on. Officially, it is said that the parade's media arrangements has been changed due to the current situation. Apparently, now only Russian state media are being granted access. This step alone is extremely unusual. The fact that accreditations are first approved and then revoked shortly afterwards mainly shows how nervous Moscow has become, and above all, how concerned they are about the parade. The Kremlin is trying to maintain complete control over images, perspectives, and possible incidents. Right now, this is politically very sensitive Because at the same time, more and more drone attacks are taking place deep inside Russia. Every explosion, every air defense response, or any visible security measure would damage the central narrative of the parade. Absolute strength, stability, and control are the things they want to convey here. The fact that foreign media are now being excluded does not indicate self-confidence, as we have seen in many social media posts. Rather, it points to a fear of uncontrolled images. The Kremlin wants to prevent international camera crews from documenting how heavily Moscow is now being locked down and how tense the security situation really is. At first, I wanted to say they also want to prevent incidents like back then from being seen again, when the most modern tank, the T-14 Armada, broke down during the parade and stopped because of engine failure. And then I realized that there won't be any vehicles at the parade anymore, but the frantic security lockdown shows just how much power now has to be protected, controlled, and staged. We always looked at or listened to what I or the West had to say, but what do the citizens actually say about it? In Moscow, even Russian citizens are now openly irritated by the heavily restricted military parade on May 9th. After reports about missing military equipment and reduced displays emerged, some people are now publicly asking what Russia even wants to celebrate anymore, while the war is consuming more and more resources and at the same time is not producing any clear victories. That is precisely what is dangerous for the Kremlin. May 9th is not just a holiday, but one of Vladimir Putin's most important political rituals. If less equipment is shown now, in this case, no equipment at all, or if entire parts of the staging have to be changed, it often gives the impression that Russia is under military or organizational pressure. And now that's happening among their own citizens as well. This becomes especially problematic because these doubts are not just coming from abroad, but now from within Moscow itself. And if those doubts are voiced openly, that's a big problem, because that's exactly what the Kremlin usually tries to prevent at all costs. Visible cracks in the image of national unity. So the real weakness doesn't lie in a lack of vehicles on Red Square, but rather in the fact that now central displays of power by the system suddenly appear defensive, secured, reduced, and overshadowed by security concerns. And now the people themselves see, something isn't right here. But the mood in St. Petersburg isn't necessarily any better either. On a Russian propaganda poster, it originally says "Glory to the heroes of Russia." Below that, there's a picture of a soldier. Someone smeared red paint over the poster and wrote the word "murderer" in large letters across it. Exactly these kinds of images are extremely uncomfortable for the Kremlin because they show that resistance to the war exists not only outside of Russia. State war propaganda is being directly attacked and symbolically reversed in public spaces. By the way, respect to the person who did this, because speaking badly about the armed forces can of course lead to a prison sentence. This is especially risky just before May 9th. While the state tries to make patriotism, willingness to sacrifice, and military pride as visible as possible, signs of their rejection also appear from time to time. And that's exactly why the system in Russia now reacts so sensitively to any form of public criticism, because even small symbolic acts make it clear, well, that control over public sentiment is no longer complete. And now we're going to take a look at something really interesting. Will there even be an attack on the parade? In the last few days, we've speculated a lot. We've weighed a lot of options. We've seen a lot about what advantages and disadvantages it would bring. But it's very unlikely that there will be one. Why? Well, Zelensky tweeted the following today. Zelensky stated that despite Ukraine's ability to carry out long-range attacks around Moscow, they will prioritize a prisoner exchange and a temporary ceasefire. Specifically, he spoke about an exchange in the format of 1,000 for 1,000 people, as well as a ceasefire on May 9th, 10th, and 11th. At the same time, he made it clear that Kyiv is definitely capable of putting pressure on Moscow. What stands out in particular is the wording about Ukrainian long-range capabilities in connection with tomorrow's events in Moscow. This is practically a direct reminder that the Russian capital and the parade on May 9 could theoretically remain under threat. Zelensky openly addresses the threat, but deliberately chooses to use it politically rather than militarily. Paradoxically, this is exactly what increases the pressure on the Kremlin, because Moscow now knows that the security of the parade is not guaranteed solely by Russian air defense, but also depends on Kyiv holding back and getting something in return. In this case, 1,000 of their own people back. This fact alone damages the image of absolute control that Putin actually wants to demonstrate on May 9th. The fact that Russia has now agreed to the exchange and a ceasefire also shows how sensitive the Kremlin has become to possible disruptions around the parade. The closer May 9th gets, the more visible it becomes how much political significance is now attached to getting through this day without explosions, drone alarms, or security chaos. Thanks to all subscribers, channel members, and the Algae crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renicky and Selective Ferdinand Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next video.